Welcome to the Stay Ready Real Estate Podcast, where we stay ready so you don't have to get ready. My name is Emeka, and I'll be talking to a variety amount of professionals in the real estate industry to help you buy your next real estate investment. At the end of each podcast, I'll give you 3 actionable steps that you can do today to help you get 1% closer to your goal of buying that next property. My goal with this podcast is to show the world that regular people like you and me can buy properties to build wealth. Today we have Shawn DiMartile. He used to be an air traffic controller but yearned for time freedom despite a good income. Drawn to real estate investing, he took a big leap, liquidating his 401k for a 32-unit apartment venture with partners. This a 2-year turnaround ignited his real estate passion. Shawn helps accredited investors build wealth through alternative investments to achieve financial freedom. He shares his experience and expertise through his California Gold ebook and co-hosts the popular Real Estate Takeoff podcast. He is now focused on infill and ground-up development. Here's Shawn.
My name is Shawn DiMartile. I'm a co-founder of Takeoff Capital. We are a private real estate firm that invests exclusively in multifamily. Our portfolio currently is a little over 300 units. We've bought and sold some. I've even owned a hotel that we sold last year. So, that's a little bit about, I'm based in San Diego, California. And, I own real estate in North Carolina primarily is where a lot of our units are. But now we're focusing here in San Diego on ground up development and infill development. But, I got into real estate. I started as an air traffic controller. That's what my W-2 job was before. Grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. When I was in college, decided I wanted to join the Navy, become an air traffic controller. Just mainly because it made good money. And I did just that, got out or moved to San Diego for my first duty station and only duty station. And when I got out, I stayed in San Diego and got hired by the Federal Aviation Administration doing air traffic control here in San Diego as well. Mm-hmm. I did that for another 6 years. And while I was doing that, I started investing in real estate. And I did this because my air traffic control job was so demanding and I was working so many hours, usually 6-day work weeks. And I just didn't want to do that until retirement age. I was maxing out my 401k, doing everything I thought I was supposed to, but I didn't want to keep grinding like that until retirement. I started learning about real estate and the power that it has to allow you to walk away from a job like that, and got obsessed with it. Listening to podcasts, reading the books, the whole 9 yards. And this was, 5-6 years ago. And decided to go all in. I liquidated my 401k to do my very first investment, which was a 32-unit apartment. And this, by the way, was before I ever even owned my own home. I didn't even have a condo or anything. I was renting when I did this. And so the rest is history. From there, started scaling up after we sold that first one. Got a mentor that did syndications and was doing things much bigger than me. And every year we've purchased more and more apartments to get to where we are today, which again is, a little over 300 units and counting. And I love it. I was able to walk away from the W-2 job as an air traffic controller 2 years ago and go full time on this.
What made you switch from multifamily syndications focusing on value add to focusing on infill and ground up construction?
So it's there's a lot of reasons. I mean, we were investing in North Carolina on our big syndications with my mentor, primarily because that's where my mentor lives. He owns his own property management company and is vertically integrated with all of that. He's owned over 10,000 units over there, currently has several thousand. So it made the most sense for us to do projects over there with him to get started and do more deals initially. We're based in San Diego, California. Almost all of our investors are here in Southern California. So we did want to eventually migrate and start digging our feet in and establishing ourselves as Southern California investors. That kind of played into it, but the problem is value add multifamily is a lot harder to execute as a business plan in Southern California. I'm sure most people listening to this podcast probably aren't from here and are hearing California and thinking, oh my God, it's so expensive. I don't hear people on Bigger Pockets talking about it. The landlord-tenant laws I've heard are bad. And all of that is true, but people are still crushing it here. Now, I would agree that when it comes to the value-add multifamily, it's a lot more difficult. It's harder to get a tenant out so that you can renovate the unit and increase rents. And because of that, I've never really been interested in the value-add multifamily here. But San Diego, I started to get really interested in San Diego when reading about the supply and demand imbalance here. So San Diego, to provide some context for your listeners, is geographically constrained. You have the ocean to the west, you have Mexico directly bordering to the south, you have mountains to the east that are too expensive to build on, and then you have Camp Pendleton military base in the north of the county. So all of the flat land has already been built on. And San Diego is a growing city. There's a lot of jobs that have been moving down here. It's basically been booming since I've been here. But they can't build enough housing to make up for that. It's been leading the nation in home price growth. I mean, even over the past year, I believe it's ranked up there in the top. It might be number one still with home price growth. And the same is true for rent growth because they just can't build the units to satisfy the demand. So to put it into perspective, Dallas-Fort Worth last year built 55,000 new apartment units. And then they built over 12,000 new single-family homes in Dallas. San Diego built 5,000 new housing units, and that includes apartments, single-family homes, and ADUs. So to kind of put in perspective on the difference you're seeing in these other markets, Seattle, I built over 40,000 multifamily units. So they can't really build here. And what they've done is they created these, 2 years ago, they created these programs called the Bonus ADU program and the Complete Communities program. In essence, what these are programs that are increasing the density of the city. So, if there's a lot that is zoned for multifamily, but it currently has a single-family home on it, you can tear down that home and build an apartment complex on it. If the lot's big enough, depending on where it's at, there's a lot of factors. But in essence, you can even buy, I've seen a car wash that was purchased, they demoed it, and built a 24-unit apartment complex in its place. Oh, wow. So it's basically programs that are encouraging higher density. And you're able to get faster permitting times, but you're able to build these multifamily units for a fraction of what you can sell them for when you're finished. So it just started to make a ton of sense to us to switch to this development side while we can. I wrote an ebook about this called California Gold because I see it as the new California gold rush. A lot of money is flocking to this infill development or ground up development here because of the fact that these programs are fresh and the well is going to run dry eventually. Like there's only so many lots that make sense to do it on. So I think over the next 5 to 10 years, this is the number one strategy in Southern California, and we're all in on it.
No, that's amazing. I almost guarantee you right now there's someone listening saying, okay, he lives in California, he's started with a high-paying job. That's not me, right? I'm a mailman, or I just have a regular W-2 out of college. I can't start off like you can, Shawn. So what did you do to start to get into your ground-up construction?
So, in order to get started, it took a lot of learning and studying. Municipal codes, learning the process, talking with other developers. Get obsessed with it. Become a subject matter expert on that topic. And I think that's always square one. So to get started, I was studying the municipal codes, making Excel spreadsheets with each rule and how it would apply to our kind of projects, determining what size, like practicing underwriting properties, determining how many units we could add to it. Getting on calls with the city, because here in San Diego, you can make an appointment, a 15 or 30-minute appointment with the city to ask them about a specific project. And we would get on calls with them and say, hey, we want to build this many units here. Can you confirm we'd be able to do it? What are the permitting timelines at right now? And just learning everything we could about developing here. And that took time. I spent most of the past 2 years honing on all that, finding a partner, a project manager that really understands construction to help us underwrite for the cost. So, we brought in a third partner for that. So I think anybody that's listening and they live in a different market, like how in the world am I going to get started with that? I understand if you don't have the money, because I didn't have the money to do it all myself either. I've had to raise money from investors, and that takes time. That's a whole nother, subject on convincing people to invest in your opportunities. But I think you're going to have to obsess and become that subject matter expert. And then if you don't have the money, you can use that expertise to then raise the money or bring in somebody that can. But in getting into San Diego and more reasons why, here in San Diego, there are really strict landlord-tenant laws. If you want to renovate a unit, okay, and someone's, they're month to month or whatever, and you want to say, hey, I don't want to renew with you. I want you to leave so that I can renovate this unit. You can't really do that if the tenant is paying on time and your renovations don't require them to move for 30 days. Basically, you have to do substantial renovations that require permitting, and they can't safely stay there for 30 days. So you have to do basically a full gut job if you're doing a value add. On top of that, if you buy a value add multifamily, you could be inheriting bad tenants that are going to be hard for you to evict. The list goes on, and that's not to say that it's a bad business plan, but it's harder to predict and underwrite for if I don't know when I'm going to be able to get that tenant out. So maybe if you're doing your own deals, that can make sense. But if you're raising money from investors, I don't want to make projections that I can't really stand by. So because of this, when we're looking at, and on top of that, one more thing is here in San Diego, if you're buying, a lot of these multifamilies here were built in the 50s. If you're buying one of these properties built in the 50s in San Diego, you're going to be paying over $500,000 per unit. I've seen properties that just got finished with a value add and there's no meat left on the bone that are trading for north of $700,000 a unit. So, but here, if you're doing these, building yourself and doing these bonus ADU programs or the complete communities, you can be all in for $300,000 to $400,000 a unit on the higher end and sell it for $600,000 plus on the back end, depending on what neighborhood you're in. And that's just depending on land costs, what your plan is, and how many units it's going to be. I mean, you can be as low as $250,000 a unit, and then still sell it for north of $500,000. So the numbers make sense, way more sense than a value add multifamily. And on top of that, you're going to own a brand new asset that's going to have a lower expense ratio, fewer problems, and you're going to attract the best tenants. People that have great jobs that even despite the landlord-tenant laws, if you're renting somebody a really nice brand new apartment less than a mile from the beach, that, is somebody that's making good money, is, a nurse or a doctor or someone in sales, these people are less risky to rent to. It's less likely they're going to lose their job. And even if they did, less likely that they would not be able to go and find another job as opposed to somebody that works in retail or something. So we found there to be less risk, more profit potential, and we're able to get, put brand new product online in some neighborhoods that don't have lots of new units. So all of these things combined, like the more and more we looked at it, it just seemed to make the most sense to us to build brand new.
No, that makes sense. Do you see a bigger advantage of people investing where they are located currently? And do you think where they are matters, right? Some people say that there's a different market that's better than the other. And I would argue that it just depends on what you know about the market.
So there's a lot of benefits to it. And I've done both, obviously. Invested out of state, that's how I got started. It's easier to do if you live in an expensive market like San Diego. Mm-hmm. But there's a ton of benefits. Number one, it's going to be easier to raise capital. Depending on where you live, most of the people that might invest with you probably live where you live too. And if that's the case, they know the market that you guys live in, and it's easier to explain the benefits of a project and the viability of a project if the people that are investing have intimate knowledge of that market. So almost all of my investors live here in Southern California. When I say, hey, we're going to do a project here in Pacific Beach, this is what it's going to look like, this is where it's located. They know that area. They know the demand. I don't have to tell them the demographics of the neighborhood because they know it. They've lived there. They probably even lived in that neighborhood themselves. So it makes sense to them a lot easier. As opposed to trying to explain to them a deal that's in Greensboro, North Carolina, they know nothing about Greensboro. So there's a huge advantage for your investors. I think that there's other really great advantages outside of that, such as the fact that you're going to be it's going to be easier for you if you grow your business in your own market in terms of other vendors, brokers, etc., because you'll start to make a name for yourself there. It's easier to network with brokers on the regular. I try to have lunch with an industry professional or an investor every single week, once a week. I'll take a broker out for lunch just to kind of see what they're seeing in the market, any crazy sales, catch up with them just on a personal level, friendly level too. It's hard to put how valuable that is, but I've learned, like, when I was trying to compete for deals in North Carolina and I'm just yet another random guy from California calling these brokers, it's way harder for me to compete for deals, way harder to compete for the best deals. You're not going to be getting those pocket deals sent to you before everybody else. When a seller is choosing who they want to accept an offer from, they take into account all of this stuff. They want to know, like, what is the likelihood this guy is actually going to close? And if the broker doesn't know you, if they haven't transacted with you before, they're probably going to say, I don't really know this guy. Or this group, they're out of California. They offered a bunch of money. I don't know if they can close. My confidence isn't super high with them. Whereas if I'm in San Diego, I make an offer on a property. The brokers and realtors know my name. They know my company because they see us building around here. They'll say the exact opposite. They'll say, oh, yeah, those guys are local guys. They've done a bunch of projects in the area. If I were you, I would sell to these guys. I know they can close. I know them on a friendly level. I just had lunch with them 3 weeks ago. So you're going to gain an advantage over time. And then what ends up happening, and this has already started happening to us, is you'll be closing on deals and brokers will hear about it. So they'll say, oh, man, they'll call us up out of the blue and say, I heard you guys close on that project in Pacific Beach. That looks like it's going to be an awesome project. I think you guys might like this one too. That I haven't shown this deal to anybody else yet, but I think that you guys, it would be a good match for you guys. Here's all the information for it. Tell me what you think. That's not really going to happen to you. I mean, it can if you're a big player and you're doing a lot of deals in another market, but I'm telling you, it's a lot easier in your own backyard. Not only that, it's going to be easier for you to underwrite. You're going to know where rents are at. It's easier for you to keep a finger on the pulse of that. It's easier to underwrite deals. Somebody sends me deals and says, hey, this is over off Feldspar Street. I'm like, oh, I know exactly where that's at. That's an awesome location. I want to see that. So, there's so many benefits that are hard to measure. But you want to work towards being the top dog in whatever market you're going to invest in. That's not to say that you can't be successful, like investing in a bunch of markets out of state, because obviously tons of people do that. There's people on bigger pockets you'll hear about all the time, investing out of state, investing in other markets. But if you're doing a lot of deals in one particular market, you're becoming an expert, your friends and know personally a lot of the people that you're working with, brokers, lenders, etc., it becomes a lot easier. I'm meeting these people face to face all the time. So I would recommend, if you can invest in your own market, that the benefits are going to outweigh the negatives in most cases. However, with the asterisk on that, if you can't afford to invest in your own market, I totally understand that. My first deal we bought for $1.2 million, and it was a 32 unit. And obviously this was years ago. And that was out of state. For that same price, you could maybe get a duplex in San Diego. So I get it if you're priced out of your market. It's not going to make sense for everybody. So I think you got to carefully consider what you can afford, what your investors are going to be interested in. I mean, if you randomly propose a deal to your investors in some town in Idaho and you live on the East Coast, they might be like, man, I don't know about Idaho. I don't want to invest. So you got to take that into account. And then you got to take into account your 3, 5, and 10-year goals. Like, where do you want to be?
So you did mention risk whenever you're talking about the ground up construction. And risk is one of the main reasons why a lot of people don't get into real estate. And being in California, I'm sure that there's many people thinking that there's so many risks just because it's a blue state. They don't care about the landlords there. Has there been any of those kind of instances?
I mean, the only time that I've ever had that kind of stuff happen was on my very first project, which I learned a lot from. We definitely made some mistakes. The very first deal I ever did, which was in Indianapolis, and it wasn't a San Diego project, was we ran out of money basically on our very first deal and had to borrow money in order to finish the project. Now, we ended up doing well, but it really taught me a lot about my due diligence. That first deal, when we got into our first summer, we had air conditioners that were dying basically every month. And those cost over $4,000 a pop to replace. And when we did our inspection, we realized that they were working, but what we didn't ask was, what kind of remaining useful life do we have on these things? And that's something that if I buy a value add multifamily, I want to know, like, all the major components. How much longer estimated do we have on these? Like, what's their condition? Am I going to have to start replacing it because I need to raise the money for it if that's the case? The other thing I ran into that was just, worst case scenario with that project was the plumbing. This was a 1968 vintage 32 unit apartment, and the pipes were made out of cast iron, and then the drainage pipes had big clay pipes, and those were corroded and collapsing. And so we had to do tens of thousands of dollars and rip up the parking lot just to lay new drainage pipes, etc. And this really has taught me that while there can be more money in fixing up the older properties, it's what you hear people doing the most with multifamily. There's also a lot of risk in that. And that's why these properties also trade, in theory, at higher cap rates. For the listeners that aren't familiar with cap rates or capitalization rates, it's a reflection of what you're paying, but it's also a reflection of risk, a market's opinion of risk. So here in San Diego, stuff trades at, a sub 4% cap rate for the newer stuff versus, the older stuff in Indiana might trade at a 6.5 cap or a 7% cap rate. But that's a reflection of risk. So over there, an older asset carries more risk, so I should be buying it at a lower basis in order to take on that risk. Whereas a newer property, I might pay a lower cap rate, but everything's brand new. I'm probably not going to have plumbing issues. The air conditioners and everything are good for years to come. And here in California, we have rent control. But if I build a brand new unit, a brand new apartment complex, rent control doesn't apply to us for 15 years. So you eliminate some of that risk here in California if you build brand new. I would agree that the older properties carry more risk in a lot of ways. But if I build a brand new one, I don't have to deal with that. I'm putting in my own tenants. I don't have to comply with the rent control regulations. And I don't have to worry about things breaking all the time. So for those that are thinking about getting in real estate and they're worried about risks, I would say to consider that when you're selecting what kind of an asset you want to invest in. You're just trading one risk for another. There's always a risk somewhere. Even with ground-up development, there's a lot of risk in the actual development aspect of it. So you're going to want somebody with experience on your team doing that before you get into it. But you can't eliminate risk, but you can mitigate it, no matter what your business plan is. And I want to finish that by saying, if you are listening to me and you're thinking, oh, no way I would invest in California, that's fine. But I would tell you that if anyone ever tells you you can't be highly successful in any real estate market, don't listen to that person. They have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. People are crushing it in New York City, despite how expensive it is. People are crushing it in LA. People are crushing it in San Diego. People are crushing it in Seattle. Just because it's on the West Coast or just because it's a very expensive market does not mean you can't be really successful. You just have to learn how to make money in that market.
No, exactly. And obviously, since people have been listening, you have a lot of knowledge next to you and in you. And based off what you know now, if you knew the same things when you got started, would you do anything differently?
Would I do anything differently? Yeah, I would do a couple of things differently. I think I would have started investing in San Diego sooner, to be quite honest with you, because places like San Diego appreciate like crazy. I mean, no matter how crazy it gets here, they had it on the news recently where they were showing people in the 80s and 90s talking about how crazy expensive it was in San Diego. No matter how big it gets, wages continue to come up here, and we'll look back 5 or 10 years and say, man, I can't believe prices were that 10 years ago. I bought I bought a duplex just 2.5 years ago in San Diego. I bought it for $960,000, and people were saying, man, I can't believe you would pay that for a duplex. It's worth $1.3 million now. And I've made more money quicker on San Diego projects than I have in my other markets. So I would say I would have bought in San Diego sooner because of how quickly it appreciates. And yes, you start out with less cash flow, but you will make up for it over the years. Rents will keep going up. Appreciation will keep happening here. Properties double in value every 10 years in San Diego like clockwork. And I don't think that's going to change. I see the signs, and I would have jumped in way sooner.
Is there any myths that you debunked once you got into real estate? Was there anything that someone told you that tried to get you not to do it, that once you got into it, you're like, he's crazy?
There's a lot of those, man. I've got a long list. I've got a bunch of receipts of people that would say like, oh man, I know so many people that have tried to get started like that and didn't make it and got washed out. Especially when it came to liquidating my 401k, people telling me I was crazy to consider that. I had most people think I'm crazy for investing in Southern California, but that's usually only people that don't live here and don't see how the appreciation works and how much money people make on real estate here. Usually people out of state that just listen to Bigger Pockets in the news. I've been on a podcast, and when I told them I was investing in San Diego, the woman literally went, "Why?" like that. And that's all been debunked. Again, I've invested in North Carolina, I've invested in Kentucky, I've invested in Indiana, and I've invested in California. I've made the most money in California, bar none. So that's a huge myth that I've debunked. I mean, I was so fearful of doing that investing here years ago, and I kick myself and wish and pray I could go back in time and buy up everything I could. I think that other myths that I've seen debunked are that honestly that I think people make it out to be a little too easy. I think that when you're listening to podcasts, you're only hearing the good stuff usually. And people make it seem like it's really easy like it's a little easier than it is to build a big portfolio, have a bunch of cash flow, and get rich in real estate. I think what you're hearing usually in the podcast are outliers, people that are the exception and not the rule. Yes, I've done well for myself and built up an impressive portfolio compared to most people. But it's really hard, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of time. I mean, I quit my W-2 job, but I have a job now and doing full-time real estate. Granted, I love it. I can take off whenever I want, and I work Monday through Friday from home. But it's a ton of work. I mean, especially if you want to be really good at it and become an expert, and you're going to have to, it's like going back to college or school. Like, you're going to have to study real estate with that kind of intensity. And you're going to have to spend that amount of time. I mean, most of my time now is spent on attracting new investors and nurturing the investors that I do have. It's time consuming. And I think actually that would be maybe not necessarily a myth, but a misconception people have. If you want to do what I'm doing, if you want to raise money from investors, your calendar and schedule need to be full all the time. You need to be constantly face-to-face with potential investors, going to other people's real estate meetups, trying to, and events, and just talking with people. And trying to get somebody to say like, hey, I'd be interested in the kind of projects you guys are doing. So I would say, as far as myths being busted, like the idea that you're going to be sipping Mai Tais on a beach in a short period of time is a myth. You're going to have to bust your ass to get there. But yes, you can get there eventually, and you can eventually hire people that are taking all of these duties off of your plate. But that takes years to do. I think people need to know that.
Before I go to the next segment of the show, I'm going to ask you, if I was an investor listening to this podcast, listen to Shawn, oh my gosh, Shawn, you had so many nuggets, right? And I'm starting from ground zero. What would you tell me if my main goal is to get to $10,000 cash flow a month?
I would tell you, number one, it's a lot harder to do that nowadays than it used to be. 5 years ago, I would have told you it would be a lot easier to achieve that goal than it is today. So keep that in mind, because values have gone up so much in real estate that it's extremely difficult to cash flow. If you're cash flowing 7-8%, you're doing pretty dang good. So I think that if your goal is to get to $10,000 a month, find out what niche you want to make that money in first, because you can go the short-term rental route, which is, getting riskier by the day with all the competition, and that would be your quickest route to getting that kind of cash flow. But it's also going to take a lot of money to get to that kind of cash flow, because nowadays in short-term rental business, I have several. You have to have a really nice top-of-the-line property to make good money. So I would say understand that the road is going to be a little longer to get to $10,000 a month. You're probably eventually going to have to raise money from investors. So start now. Start your own real estate meetup podcast. Do everything you can to attract investors and get them to come to you, because you're not getting to $10,000 a month unless you're a really rich person or you're raising money from investors. And I would say 3, be open to investing anywhere. Here in San Diego, it's going to be harder for you to get to $10,000 a month in cash flow as opposed to Louisville, Kentucky, where I grew up. But over the next 10 years, me investing in San Diego is going to make me richer than if I invested in Louisville, Kentucky because of the added appreciation I'll get here. So you really got to figure out your market, your niche, the level of risk you're willing to take, and just be aware that it's going to take you some years to get there.
I got you, and I lied to you. Got one more follow-up question for you. It's 2024. There's a lot of uncertainty of what's going to happen in real estate for this year, next year, and the following. What is your opinion of what's going to happen in the market within the next 2 to 3 years?
My opinion is that everybody is going to be wishing that they were buying real estate right now, and over the past year, they wish they would have bought it. And here's why. It's clear that property values aren't going down. There's way too big of a shortage. America needs 6 million more housing units or something like that, the last I checked. Building has slowed down in a lot of the parts of the country due to the high interest rates. But even despite all of the units that are going online, when those interest rates eventually do go down, whether it's 2 years from now, 5, whenever, it'll really go down. All of the people sitting on the sidelines right now are going to be jumping back into the market. And when that happens, that's going to drive up real estate values even more. Even if President Joe Biden gets reelected and implements this plan that he has to help new home buyers buy their first home, that will also put more competition in the market and continue driving prices up. Rents are going to continue to go up. And again, there's going to be a frenzy of buying activity when the market conditions improve. It happens every time. There's blood in the streets right now. There's uncertainty in the market, so not a lot of people want to buy. Once the times are good and everyone's making money, everybody wants to buy. And it pushes the values up. The best time to buy real estate is when everyone else is scared. You're not going to have as much competition. You'll get a better price. And when everyone jumps back in the market, you'll sell for more. The same is true with stocks. The best time to buy stocks is when the market's down, when no one else wants to buy. It's hard to have that discipline. Everyone's scared to buy at that time. It's hard to get debt during those times. Right now, it's harder to get good debt terms because everyone's scared. The banks are playing it safe. That's the best time to buy. So in my opinion, over the next 2 to 3 years, the market's going to take a turn eventually, and everyone's going to be buying, and you're going to wish you had already bought.
Love it. Now it's time to go to the next segment of the show where I ask everyone the same 3 questions. Number 1, what are the 2 books you recommend an aspiring investor to read?
I think the first book is if you want to get into the kind of scaling up a multifamily business and raising money and syndicating properties and all that stuff. The Best Ever Syndication book is a book that I would highly recommend because I use that almost like a Bible when I first got started. And it even has an index of all the multifamily terms in the back so you can make flashcards and really learn the business. The second book that I would probably recommend people I would probably go with, if you're really getting started, Brandon Turner's the book on rental property investing is another great book because that will teach you the basics. If you just want to get into the small stuff first, I would highly recommend that book. That'll get your head right on where you need to be. So depending on where you want to go, I think those 2 books read both of them, honestly.
I love it. And what has been the most impactful speech or lesson that helped you in your career to date?
I think the most impactful lesson, and not a speech, has been what I learned from Robert Kiyosaki's book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Love it or hate it, what that book did for me is it taught me the lesson of retraining my brain on what I need to be focused on doing with my money. I look at that as like a finance book on the main takeaway being put every penny that you can into investing in assets, and then over time the rest will do its work and you'll build wealth. And I think that's the most important lesson. Stop saving up money so you can buy a boat or you can buy an RV or more toys for you and your family. If you can just focus and make the sacrifices to put all the money you possibly can into assets, and in particular real estate, in my opinion, just give it 5 to 10 years and you'll be way wealthier than you imagined. So that's the number 1 lesson I think everybody's got to get in their head.
Lastly, if you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be and why?
If I could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, I would probably pick the CEO of Google or Nvidia or even Apple. And the reason why is, it's one thing to learn to be really good at real estate, and then it's another thing to learn to be really good at business and growing a company. And, I've learned that as an entrepreneur, and to get to just the highest level, I'd love to sit down with some of the CEOs of the biggest companies in the world to learn from them on how you really build a company like that to become the absolute best.
Well, Shawn, I appreciate the time. We're definitely going to have you back. How can people reach out to you if they have any questions?
Thank you so much, Emeka, man. This has been a great podcast, and I had a good time talking to you. If any of your listeners want to get in touch with me, the two best ways, number one, find me on Instagram. Hopefully you have my name spelled out correctly on the show. Just search Shawn, SHAWN _ DiMartile. That's spelled DIMARTILE. You can find me on Instagram and reach out to me on there. Also following on my projects. And then the other way is to go to investorshawn.com, investorshawn, SHAWN.com. And you can get on my newsletter there. You can download my ebook for free to learn about the strategy I'm using. You can find my Instagram. You can email me, all that stuff.
Perfect. Well, Shawn, until next time. That was Shawn, everybody. At the beginning of the podcast, I told you I'd give you 3 actionable steps that you can do today to get you 1% closer to your goal of buying your next real estate investment. Before then, please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the podcast. It means the world to me, and I'm continuously trying to make this thing better. Action 1. Reach out to a property manager. You just Google your city property manager or a different city property manager and determine what the eviction process is, right? As Shawn said, real estate is not easy, and most podcasts make it seem so. There's always a Cinderella story. So reach out to a property manager and see what it takes to evict somebody and see what their process is. Because you'll come to find that the process is different, and sometimes, and a lot of times actually, you don't get all your money evicting someone. So now you can kind of determine if it's worth it for you or not. Step 2, find a realtor, a broker, could be a property manager, or an investor, a friend, someone who's interested in the things that you are, and take them out or schedule a call with them once a week. That's what Shawn does. And I talk to a minimum of 5 people a week. Networking is the hidden key to building wealth and doing it fast. Step 3, pick a niche. Shawn started off with apartment syndications, and now he's moving to ground up development, right? He got experience in the niche and figured out things he likes and the things he doesn't. But the fact is, he picked and he went. So for you, don't think too much of, okay, what about this? What about that? What about that? Because there's so many things in real estate that you can get into. So determine your goal, pick the niche that you think best fits the goal, and then go 100% and then see where that takes you. Hope to see you next Wednesday. Have a good one.